Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today for navigating obstacles rapidly in logistics. The container is on hold. You still own the shipment. The container is yours. The customer is yours. The delivery plan is yours. The customs release decision is not. That distinction sounds simple until the phone starts ringing. The warehouse wants an answer. The drayage carrier wants direction. And somebody asks you for an ETA you do not actually control. That is where this gets difficult, because when you are responsible for something, your natural instinct is to keep pushing until it moves. You check the status again, call the terminal again, ask the carrier what they see, send another message to the broker, and try to give the customer something useful, because saying, "I do not know yet," feels like you are not doing enough. A lot of that is reasonable. Some of it is exactly what you should be doing. The problem starts when the issue reaches a blocker that your coordination cannot clear, and you continue acting as though more coordination will eventually manufacture authority, expertise, access, or control that you simply do not have. Your authority can end before your ownership does. That does not mean you stop leading. It means the leadership requirement has changed. In late July, the Journal of Commerce reported heightened U.S. Customs and Border Protection activity at U.S. seaports that was increasing inspection pressure and exposure to delays and demurrage. CBP controls cargo examination and release, while the automated commercial environment supports the electronic trade transactions and information flow around that process. That gives us a real operating condition to work from. More inspection activity can mean freight sits, while another authority determines what happens next, with the exact impact varying by shipment and operating condition. But the leadership problem underneath it is straightforward. You can be responsible for moving the freight without controlling the decision that is currently preventing that freight from moving. That is where leaders get themselves into trouble. They feel customer pressure, timing pressure, warehouse pressure, carrier pressure, and the pressure that comes from knowing somebody is eventually going to ask why the original delivery plan did not happen. So the leader starts treating responsibility as though it automatically grants capability. It does not. Being responsible for the shipment does not make you a customs broker, give you CBP authority, or suddenly give you access to every system, decision right, technical interpretation, or piece of information required to handle a customs-related blocker. But there is a mistake on the other side, too. The leader sees that the issue has reached customs and says, well, it is out of my hands now. And that is not really the right read either. The customs decision may be outside your hands. The shipment is not. That difference is where the leadership work sits. Put yourself in the role for a minute. You are an import operations team lead at a third-party logistics provider. You are not running the company or controlling federal policy. You own a manageable piece of the operation, and people expect you to manage that piece well. One of your customers has a container of replenishment inventory arriving through a U.S. seaport. It is not emergency freight, but timing matters because there is inventory demand behind it. The customer has planned around it, and your team has already built the movement from the terminal to the receiving location. The drayage provider has a pickup plan, the receiving warehouse has a delivery window, and labor is being planned against that arrival. Customer service has already communicated an expected delivery based on the best information available when that plan was built. Then the shipment is selected for examination and has not been released. This is an illustrative scenario based on the current operating condition. I'm not telling you that a specific importer, port, customer, or shipment experience these exact events. The first thing that happens is predictable. The customer wants to know when the container will arrive, so the team checks shipment status, reviews terminal information, contacts the broker, notifies the drayage carrier, and looks at whether the warehouse appointment should move. There is nothing wrong with that. You are gathering information, protecting the downstream plan, and trying to determine whether the original movement is still viable. Then the problem changes. A part of the customs process now requires expertise, access, interpretation, or authority you do not possess. You can check the system, you can coordinate the truck, you can notify the warehouse and communicate what is confirmed, but you cannot personally manufacture a customs release. The truck cannot negotiate with a customs hold. The warehouse cannot release the container, and the customer cannot call the driver and make the examination disappear. Another transportation update does not replace customs expertise. Now you have reached a capability boundary. The problem is no longer simply the container is delayed. More precisely, the delay is where the problem became visible. The blocker is the part your operating team cannot move with the capability it currently has. The better question becomes, what part of this delay can my team actually move, and what part requires somebody with a different capability? That distinction protects you from two weak leadership responses. The first is overreach. You keep chasing the blocker because the shipment belongs to you. Start interpreting information you are not qualified to interpret. Give the customer a release estimate because they need something to plan around, and tell the warehouse to hold labor because you think the container will probably clear later. Maybe you keep the drayage provider close because you do not want to lose the pickup opportunity. I understand why somebody would make that call because the intent is to protect the customer and preserve the movement, but good intent does not make an unsupported commitment reliable. Now look at what happened. Nothing malicious happened. Nobody was trying to create damage. But the operation started building commitments around information nobody on the operating team actually controlled. The container is still on hold while the ETA has somehow begun freelancing. Meanwhile, the warehouse may be holding capacity. The drayage provider may be preserving a plan that cannot execute. Customer service may have created a new expectation, and the customer may be making its own decisions around a release estimate that was never supported by the release authority. One blocker is creating a second problem, and that can happen quickly. The first problem is the hold. The second is an organization building commitments around uncertainty. That second problem is yours. You may not control the release, but you do control whether unsupported assumptions spread through the rest of the operation. The other weak response is abandonment. The leader says, "Customs has it, we are waiting," and that may technically describe one part of the situation, but it does not describe the operating requirement. What are you doing with the warehouse appointment? What does the customer know? What does the drayage provider know? What information is confirmed? What remains unknown? What commitment is now exposed? And what cost or capacity pressure is building while the freight remains unavailable? Those questions did not disappear because the blocker moved outside your authority. Waiting on customs is a status statement. It is not an operating plan. Leadership still has to happen around that status. And this is where manual engagement enters the briefing. Manual engagement is useful when a blocker inside the problem requires the right human capability to handle it. That capability may be authority, expertise, judgment, trust, relationship ownership, or direct access. And the important part is that the blocker has reached a point normal process cannot clear by itself. You are not looking for more people. You are looking for the right capability. That is a very different standard. Organizations under pressure love adding people. Add the manager, add the senior manager, add the account lead, operations, legal, compliance, terminal contact, transportation. And now you have 9 people staring at one blocker, and 6 of them still cannot move it. At that point, the email chain has more movement history than the container. More people does not automatically create more control. Sometimes it just gives the same limitation, a larger audience. Manual engagement is targeted. In this situation, the customs-related blocker may require a licensed customs broker, a trade compliance specialist, an importer of record contact, or another authorized person who has the appropriate capability for that specific issue. CBP describes customs brokers as licensed professionals who assist importers and exporters with federal customs requirements. That does not mean the broker controls CBP, and I want to separate those two things because they are easy to blur when you are under pressure. The broker can work inside the role they are qualified and authorized to perform. They can help interpret what is required, work through the proper trade process, and communicate information needed from that side, but they do not get to order CBP to release the container. CBP still controls the examination and release decision. The right person does not need unlimited power. They need the capability appropriate to the blocker. That is what judgment looks like. You are not asking who is powerful enough to make this disappear. You're asking who is actually capable of handling this part correctly, because the biggest title in the room is not automatically the right capability. The operations director may outrank the customs broker and still be the wrong person to interpret a customs requirement. The warehouse manager may control every receiving decision inside the building and have no authority over the examination. The drayage carrier may have the truck ready and still have no control over whether the container is available. The capability has to match the blocker. And once you recognize that, another leadership issue shows up. Getting the right specialist involved does not mean dumping the entire shipment on that specialist. This is where people confuse escalation with transfer. They say, I gave it to compliance, and I want to ask, okay, what exactly did you give them? You could hand them the whole shipment, but that is not really the decision. Give the specialist the blocker that requires the specialist. The customer, warehouse appointment, drayage coordination, and internal status still need owners. This is the point where the operating plan becomes a cartoon. Compliance has the customs issue, transportation has the carrier, customer service has the ETA, the warehouse has labor sitting against a delivery window, and everybody is technically involved while the shipment itself has apparently been assigned to God. Take away the cartoon and the consequence remains. Involvement is not ownership. That is where manual engagement protects you from micromanagement on one side and abandonment on the other. The specialist handles the specialist blocker. You still lead everything around it. That line matters because if asking for help feels like surrendering the problem, leaders will wait too long to ask. They will keep operating beyond their capability because they think involving somebody else means losing ownership. It does not have to. You can stay responsible for the operating picture while recognizing that one point inside that picture belongs with somebody more qualified. And you are going to hit this boundary constantly if you lead real work. Maybe it is not customs, but the pattern will show up. A critical system fails, and IT owns the technical blocker while you still manage staffing, priorities, and customer communication. A machine develops a condition your team cannot responsibly diagnose. And maintenance or engineering owns the technical intervention while you still own the production consequence. Different setting, same leadership problem. You are going to lead problems bigger than your authority. That does not mean the problem stopped being yours. It means you need enough judgment to know which part requires somebody else's capability. I have learned to respect that distinction because capable people get themselves into trouble when responsibility becomes personal. They care about the outcome, so they keep pushing deeper, answering questions outside their lane because silence feels like failure. Then they start doing the specialist job because asking for help feels slower than acting. That can feel like ownership, but sometimes it is control leakage. The strongest thing you can do may be recognizing exactly where your capability ends, while continuing to own everything that still belongs to you. That is not stepping away from responsibility. That is using responsibility correctly. Go back to the container. The customs-related blocker is now with the appropriate specialist, but that does not mean the operating team sits still. The customer still needs an accurate status. Notice the word accurate because the standard is not comforting and it is not optimistic, it is accurate. If release timing is unknown, then the release timing is not confirmed. Do not manufacture certainty because the customer wants an ETA. An unsupported ETA is just confidence wearing a fake mustache. The warehouse still needs to know whether its receiving appointment remains viable. The drayage provider needs to know whether the pickup plan remains open, should be adjusted, or should be rebuilt when availability becomes clearer. Customer service needs one operating picture, not three people giving three different explanations because everybody is trying to be helpful. Leadership still has to control those pieces, and this is where the consequence chain matters. The hold itself may be unavoidable from your position. The confusion around it is not. If you keep guessing at timing, the warehouse may repeatedly move labor, the drayage plan may be rebuilt, and the customer may receive several ETAs that lose credibility with every revision. Costs can continue accumulating, including demurrage exposure depending on the operating condition. Customer confidence can weaken because the organization could not distinguish what it knew, what it did not know, and what it was doing about the consequences. That is the leadership cost. The specialist cannot protect you from all of that. That part is still yours. And now we can make manual engagement more precise because calling it call an expert is too shallow. The leadership value is recognizing that a specific human capability has become the missing control point, bringing that capability to the blocker and refusing to let that engagement destroy ownership everywhere else. Think about how easily that gets screwed up inside a team. One person says the broker is handling it. Another says compliance owns it. Customer service assumes transportation will update the customer, and the warehouse waits for somebody else to call. Everybody is involved. What we need to understand is the part that matters is whether anybody can still state who owns what. If they cannot, the specialized engagement is turned into fragmented ownership, and the escalation itself is now another operating problem. Responsibility has basically been freight forwarded between departments. The better read keeps the responsibilities separated. This blocker requires the specialist. Customer communication remains here. Drayage coordination remains here. The receiving consequence remains here. Release authority stays where it legally and operationally belongs. Now the team has something it can manage. It does not have complete control, and real operations rarely give you complete control anyway. What you need is clear control over the things that actually belong to your team. That is enough to make a much stronger decision. It is also why manual engagement cannot become the idea that every serious problem needs the leader personally involved. If every difficult issue automatically comes to you, you may be building an operation that cannot move without you. That is dependency dressed up as involvement. The right person might be you. Every blocker needs leadership involvement. Well, not every blocker needs your personal involvement. Sometimes your authority, relationship, or judgment is the missing capability. Other times, the right person is the broker, technical owner, quality lead, maintenance lead, procurement lead, or somebody else who can reach the blocker more responsibly. The leadership requirement is not personal involvement. It is correct involvement. Drayage checks, that is what changes the read. And this is where the direct action system supports the decision without becoming the point of the episode. CSA improves the read before you decide what kind of blocker you are dealing with. A container that is not moving can look like a transportation problem when transportation may no longer be the control point. Is it a carrier issue, a terminal condition, documentation, a government hold, or a customer expectation problem forming around the delay? Misread the condition and you can bring in the wrong person, then wonder why nothing moves. That cleaner CSA read feeds deepen. Deepen helps you move through the problem based on the type of problem you actually have instead of treating every blockage like it needs the same response. Manual engagement sits inside that problem navigation work. And there is an important limit here because you should not reach for direct human engagement simply because you are impatient. You do not need a specialist because you do not like the answer. You do not need a manager because the process is taking longer than you wanted. Manual engagement becomes relevant when the blocker requires something the existing path does not possess. Authority, expertise, access, judgment, trust, relationship ownership, that kind of capability. Then TMC matters because once that person engages, ownership and communication cannot get blurry. Who handles the blocker? Who owns customer communication? Who owns transportation coordination? And who updates the operating picture? Pro matters because going outside your authority can create risk beyond the original delay. An unsupported commitment can damage customer confidence, create compliance exposure, or waste labor and transportation capacity. The point is not to make the system complicated. The point is to stop pressure from making your response sloppy. You are protecting decision quality. That is all. Now bring this down to your own work. You do not need to be running a port operation to recognize the pattern. Think about the last problem you owned that reached somebody else's authority. Maybe you kept coordinating because you did not know what else to do, escalated without naming the missing capability, or handed the entire issue to a specialist and lost track of what remained yours. Those are different versions of the same failure pattern. The question is still, what part of the problem is actually blocked? not what is frustrating you, not what the customer keeps repeating, not what the loudest person says is wrong, what specifically cannot move. Then ask whether the people currently working that point actually possess the capability required to move it. Do they have the authority, expertise, access, judgment, relationship ownership? If the answer is no, continuing to push them harder may not be leadership. More precisely, you may just be increasing pressure on people who cannot control the point you need moved. Then ask what remains yours. That question is just as important because the moment another capability enters the issue, ownership drift becomes possible. What communication still belongs to you? What timing decision still belongs to you? What customer expectation, downstream consequence, coordination requirement, or follow-through still belongs to you? Do not disappear because somebody more specialized entered the problem. They did not automatically become the leader of your entire operating issue. They became the right capability for one blocker. Keep that distinction clean. And there is one phrase I want you to listen for because it shows up everywhere. We are waiting on them. Sometimes that is legitimate. Sometimes it is a vague excuse that has been allowed to replace ownership. Waiting on who? Waiting for what? What exact output are you waiting on? And does that person actually control it? What are you doing while you wait? What decision changes when the answer arrives? And what happens if the answer does not arrive when expected? Those questions tell you whether you have a control dependency or a hole in the operating plan. In our container situation, we are waiting on customs does not tell the team enough. That sentence can sit in a status meeting for 3 days and somehow collect a paycheck. You may genuinely be waiting for the government process. Fine. But the operating team still needs to know what that means. The release is not confirmed. The pickup plan may no longer be reliable. The warehouse expectation may have to change. The customer should not be given a fabricated release time. The appropriate specialist is handling the customs-related requirement, and the movement plan changes when confirmed information changes. Now you have a controlled operating picture. Still uncertain, yes, but controlled. And does that make sense? Leadership is not making uncertainty disappear. Leadership is keeping uncertainty from turning into uncontrolled behavior. That is a different standard, and it is a much more realistic one. The container can sit while the operation around it remains disciplined. The specialist can work the blocker while the team lead continues controlling the pieces that remain inside their authority. The customer can receive accurate information without being promised an outcome nobody controls. The warehouse can make decisions based on confirmed conditions instead of optimism, and the drayage provider can adjust against a real movement plan rather than a guess. That is better leadership. Not because you solved everything, because you understood what was yours to solve and what was not. That is the maturity manual engagement is trying to protect. Some blockers do not need more effort or a takeover. They need the right capability. And some blockers do not remove your responsibility. They define the boundary of your authority. Those distinctions matter because people get hurt operationally when leaders blur them. Costs move downstream. Customers get bad information. Teams waste labor. Specialists get buried in work they do not own. And people without authority get blamed for decisions they never controlled. That part bothers me because accountability has to follow control. If somebody did not have the authority, expertise, access, or information required to clear the blocker, you cannot pretend they should have somehow willed their way through it. Hold them accountable for what was theirs. Customer communication, coordination, escalation, accuracy, follow-through, whatever legitimately sat inside their role. Then hold the specialist responsible for the piece that actually required the specialist. That is fair, it is clean, and it gives the organization a much better chance of learning from the problem instead of just finding somebody to blame. Here is the field level standard I want you to carry forward. When something you own reaches a blocker outside your authority, do not immediately take over and do not immediately hand the entire problem away. Identify what is actually stuck. Recognize what capability the blocker requires. Get the right person onto that point, then stay responsible for everything that remains under your control. That is enough for the recognition level. The full application goes deeper into capability selection, scope, authority boundaries, engagement control, reassessment, and returning the work to the appropriate path. But you do not need the full method to recognize when the current response is wrong. Look at your next escalation and ask whether you are adding process. Because you still have a process problem or because you have not admitted, the blocker now requires a different human capability. Look at the person working it. Can they actually move the point that is stuck? Then look at yourself. Are you trying to personally solve something because you think ownership means you should have expertise you do not possess? Or have you backed away too far because another authority entered the issue? That is the inspection. Your authority can end before your ownership does. The container is on hold. You still own the shipment. Put the right hands on the blocker. Keep your hands on what remains yours. When you are ready to go deeper with this tool, go to www.direct-action-system.io/course-directory. Open the course directory, find the course connected to manual engagement and deepen, and start there. That is where the deeper application belongs. Thanks for listening to the briefing.